Grace Bible Church, welcome back to an episode of Living by the Book, and it's been a few weeks.
Yes,
it's been a while. We took a little summer vacation. Not really. We were just both gone a lot.
Yeah, we couldn't both be here at the same time.
Yeah, and not on vacation for the most part.
If we weren't here, if we were here,
right?
The brains behind the outfit wasn't here, and so we couldn't do it.
I thought about doing using my iPhone to do a selfie for a video.
Throwback.
But throwback to our early days.
And
I just decided, you know what? Let's just wait for the tech guys to come back. I think that's the right decision.
Yeah.
But I'm excited to be back. And what I wanted to talk to you about, Pastor Rick, is over the past few weeks, you've been working through 1 Timothy in the mornings, on Sunday mornings. And you spent a couple weeks in that passage discussing the church's care of widows.
Yes.
And it delineates who is a widow indeed and who is not. But I think, your emphasis really was on the command given to the church to care for the widows within the church. And that's an expression of our love both for them, but also for the body of Christ as a whole.
Right.
And it's been really cool to see the response to those messages.
Yes.
Because so many people, and that's just where you see the power of God's word. Right. So many people have come to you or me or other members of the staff and said, okay, I'm convicted. I have been commanded to do this and I want to. What should I do? Right. And I think that's the question is how can I engage our widows? How can I care for them? Well, what should be my next steps? So I thought this would be a great venue to answer that question for a number of people. So I'd love for you to just take it away and share a few ways that people can obey those biblical commands.
Yes, that's a good question. It's a good subject. I'm glad to talk about it. I think for too long, the pace and occupation of ministry in various dimensions has caused the rate of speed of ministry to leave people behind. And one of those that I think, one category of people that I fear has been somewhat left behind, at least organizationally, are the widows. Now, thankfully, we have individual saints who are sensitive to the Spirit of God and to the need of these ladies and have stepped up and have been engaged in ministering to the widows. And so I think that the widows would say, no, well, we've had people ministering to us.
And that's a good, there are a number of people who this has been one of their primary ministries for a long time, for which we're deeply grateful.
And they've been affirmed by these things, more affirmed than convicted.
Yeah.
There are other people that have been more convicted than affirmed, which is great. And that's what should happen as the Lord brings us all to greater maturity, greater awareness, and discernment as to what our priorities ought to be as a church. And I just remind the church of what God said through James when he said, if anyone thinks himself to be religious, right? So if you're contenting yourself on your religious prowess and you cannot bridle your tongue, you deceive your own heart, and that religion is worthless. But pure and undefiled religion in the sight of God our Father is this: to visit orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself unstained by the world. So there is a desire to visit the widow. Now, why would you visit someone? Well, usually visitation is associated with someone who has a need. You visit in the hospital. You visit bereaved people. You visit, sick people or people who are deprived of something. If a person loses a job, you would go and visit them and encourage them and pray with them. If a person has a new baby, you'd go and visit them to celebrate with them. If a person has a child that dies, you would go and you'd visit them and celebrate with them. The homegoing, if they're believers, obviously. But a widow is someone that you would go to visit because there's a need. And the need that a widow has is for companionship. They're very lonely. And I think that there's a need that we have to pay attention. That's essentially the lowest hanging fruit. Pay attention to widows. Don't allow them to be an invisible demographic to you. Don't assume other people are going to minister to a widow. Each of us needs to see the widows as dear, precious, honorable sisters in our faith and engage them. Don't ignore them. Don't pass by them without greeting them. My mother tells a story about even church staff people that she knows of widows who say, I don't think the pastor even knows my name. Or elders. I've never spoken to an elder in this church, not Grace Bible, but this is other churches, as she traveled around the country and listened to the voices of widows in those churches who were marginalized, neglected, ignored, who basically formed a silent, invisible minority where they just didn't feel anyone cared for them. Well, that's a bane to the church, to have that kind of a perception by widows within the congregation that they are invisible or they don't matter or nobody pays any attention to them. So I would say at the very minimum, deliberately and intentionally seek to greet widows and learn their names, use their names, and engage them in some way. Invite them over to enjoy a meal with you. It doesn't have to be Sunday. It could be on a weeknight or something. Invite them over. We'd love to have you over. We'd love our kids to get to know you or see you, and we'd love to spend the evening with you. That kind of thing would go long way. My mother, long before she became a widow, this would have been in the probably late 80s, early 90s. I don't remember exactly when it was, but she was the wife of the executive director of the IFCA International, which was my father. And so my father and my mother served in that role for numbers of years, 13, 14 years, something like that. And in those early years of their ministry, my mom was particularly burdened for widows. And so she founded a magazine for widows called Cara Fellowship. Cara is the Greek word for widow. And the Cara Fellowship newsletter became a magazine that's still published today that addresses the unique needs of widows, right? And it is written for the widow, often by widows who can speak with experience and color to the needs that widows have and how those needs can be met. And it's good for widows to have that encouragement and those articles and poems and stories that the magazine provides that allows them to recognize that what they're going through is not peculiar or unique, but it's fairly common among those who are widowed as they. And I would encourage any widows that listen to this to subscribe to that magazine. You can call the church office or email admin@gracefaroaks.com and subscribe to that magazine. Or it may be that you have a widowed family member that you would call and subscribe and have it sent to them for them, right? So my mom is so vested in this that she is called by the IFC on occasion to say, hey, our funding is running out. Can you raise some money? And my mom says, sure. So within a week, she'll raise $5,000 from people that she'll call and people that want to give. She just met that goal, I think, about 2 months ago. She just raised the money that was necessary for the next 2 years of publication. But there are bundles that churches can purchase, and there are individual subscriptions people can purchase that would provide some ideas as to how ministry to widows by individuals and by churches can be maximized.
So this newsletter isn't just written for widows, but it would be even beneficial for someone who is seeking to minister well to widows.
Because it
just
enables
to see
you
the
to
experiences and it provides understanding and okay.
So that would be something I would suggest, to get a hold of that magazine, or at least subscribe to the magazine for a widowed family member.
Sure.
To make them available. And I think those are some really low-hanging fruit things. But I think the elders are talking about this. And in fact, we discussed it at the last elders meeting, and we set it as an agenda item for future discussion. How we should formalize not merely ministry to widows, although that's a discussion that needs to be had for sure, but ministries for widows. In other words, how can we provide widows with official ways that are duly recognized by those who qualify, where they can serve in responsible laden ministries, right? So we can load responsibilities onto them and say, we rely on you to perform these ministries, which will provide greater breadth of the fact that life goes on, right? That's what they prefer to be called, I guess. A bunch of them got together and they formulated a group that meets occasionally, and they call themselves the Life Goes On group. Well, that's life goes on. Sometimes a widow needs to be convinced that it actually does.
Yeah.
Right?
And that they still have so much that the church needs.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so we need to provide a way for widows to be functionally and profitably engaged in ministry, to edify the rest of the saints, to demonstrate to them this is how life goes on. Because they've reverted in their marital status to what the Apostle Paul says is for the church's sake and the cause of Christ's sake a preferable state,
right,
than marriage. Right? In 1 Corinthians 7, it talks about the fact that it's better for the widow and the unmarried to be as he is, but if they must marry, they have not sinned. Right? It's better to marry than to burn, and so on. But he talks about the superiority for the sake of the church and the cause of Christ for a person not to have to mind the things of this world, which in that same chapter, he talks about that a person who gets married must mind the things of this world. He who has a wife must mind the things of this world. She who has a husband must mind the things of this world. But a person who does not have a spouse has the ability to mind the things of Christ.
Right.
And
solely and primarily.
Right. And it's not nunnery. I mean, somebody asked me after the last, are you advocating that a widow becomes a nun? I said, well, no. But let's take aspects of a nun's devotion and recognize it as a very valuable level of devotion, right? And that's what he is saying in that passage in 1 Timothy chapter 5, where he talks about making a pledge to Christ that you're going to serve him in response to his great tenderness and care for you, that you're going to serve Christ. And those who peel off of that to pursue a man violate that pledge, basically, that they have made, where they said that because of those sensual desires, in disregard of Christ, and have set aside their previous pledge, right? So there's something formal. There's a list.
Yeah.
In order to get on that list, you have to make a pledge that you're going to serve Christ and not pursue a man or a husband. And then the church bestows upon you certain responsibilities in light of your pledge and devotion to Christ. We trust them with certain ministries.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where the elders need to really formulate, what does that look like in our church? Because it's not really delineated in the scripture what those pursuits are. There's apparently a circuit of homes that you're going to be responsible to visit. You go in and you speak to them things that are wholesome and worthy, which is probably the word of God, as you older women teach younger women to love their husbands, to be keepers at home, to love their children, and so on, to promote those values among other women, would be some within the context of 1 Timothy 5 are addressed. So you can begin to populate a function exegetically by observing those, or deductively. And so the elders need to work on, being intentional in that ministry for widows. But then there's also the other aspect of ministry to widows that I think the church in general needs to embrace. And I think instead of formalizing that, I think it would be detrimental to formalize that. That it needs to be generic in terms of just an outgrowth or an outcropping of the fruit of a heart of love and compassion. That is the heart of God himself, right? So that's what pure religion and undefiled is, to visit the widow in her distress, to make sure that their needs are met, to make sure that they're not lonely, to make sure that they have opportunity to be engaged and to have fellowship. And I think we need to do that. So that would be a ministry to widows. So I think that there are, I said to somebody, they said, do we have a list of widows? And I said, we do. But it's not the list referred to by Paul.
Right.
So it's a list.
Right.
But all the women on the list we have would not be put on the list that is advocated by Paul.
Right.
So a list, like what we have, would be a list of widows to whom we can minister. The list advocated by the Apostle Paul would be a group of widows for whom we need to provide ministry.
Right.
If that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I think that's what the elders need to figure out.
Yeah. No, and that's helpful. And I mean, one of the outcomes of this video is very much there's more to come. And a lot of this is going to be formalized, like you said, especially that ministry for widows. But I appreciate your encouragement. Also, if I would, someone came up to me on Sunday and said, "Hey, I've loved these messages. I've been thinking about this. I would love to do this. Would that be okay?" And my response was, "Absolutely. Like if it's on your heart, do it." Right? We're not in the business of trying to stop people from exercising the ideas and the giftings that they have to minister to these people.
Well,
and
17 years ago when I came here, there was a culture that existed that said you can't do any ministries unless you get permission. That existed.
Yeah, sure.
And basically it was an attitude that said stop until we say go. And we have worked hard to turn that completely around and say go unless we say stop.
Unless we say stop.
Right, go.
Absolutely.
Whatever the Lord lays on your heart, do it.
Yep.
And if it's out of bounds, we'll let you know.
Yeah.
But the likelihood is, with the caliber of people that exist in this church, that the impulses to serve that people know are genuinely from God's Spirit and will be something that would advance the edification of those to whom you're seeking to minister.
Yep. And I think that's that would be the perfect takeaway from this video, is that our desire is to see people minister as God's Spirit is leading them. So I appreciate that encouragement in church. We hope it's an encouragement to you. There is great potential for service in this church, certainly to our widows and to a variety of people. And our desire is that you would follow the Spirit's leading in doing that. It'll be for the better of the church as a whole.
Right.
So I appreciate that, Pastor Rick, and definitely looking forward to more clarity from the elders on what this looks like going forward. But I'm grateful for that. In church, we are grateful for you, and we look forward to seeing you guys in another episode of Living by the Book. Take care.